Katie Morrison pushed her brown hair behind her ear as she hurried down the metal corridor of Frontier Station Kepler 7. The emergency alert had pulled her from her small laboratory where she had been examining tissue samples from a sick colony animal. She was not used to emergency calls. As the station's veterinarian and xenobiologist, her days usually involved quiet research and caring for the various creatures that lived on the remote outpost. The briefing room doors slid open with a hiss. Inside, Commander Ben Harris stood at the head of a long table, his gray uniform crisp despite the late hour. Around the table sat the station's key personnel. Security Chief Dan Cooper had his arms crossed, his face set in hard lines. Dr. Greg Palmer, the station's senior xenobiologist, was scrolling through data on his tablet with quick, nervous movements. Dr. Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly, Commander Harris said. His voice was calm, but Katie could see the tension in his shoulders. We have a situation. Katie took a seat and pulled her own tablet from her bag. What kind of situation? The worst kind, Dan Cooper said. His voice was rough. Velkar. Katie felt her stomach tighten. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Velkar. They were the species that made veteran soldiers nervous. The ones that appeared in warnings and horror stories told across 100 worlds. Commander Harris pulled up an image on the main screen. It showed a crashed ship, half buried in gray rock and dust. The vessel was twisted and broken, its hull torn open in several places. This transport crashed on the nearby moon 4 hours ago. We detected the impact and sent a probe to investigate. All the adults are dead, Doctor, Palmer added, looking up from his tablet. But the cargo survived. Cargo? Katie asked. The screen changed to show the interior of what looked like a reinforced chamber. Through a transparent panel, Katie could see small shapes moving. They were roughly the size of house cats, with shining shells that caught the light. They had multiple legs and large, dark eyes. Velkar hatchlings, Commander Harris said. 12 of them. The transport was relocating them to a new colony world. The nursery pod was built to survive anything. And it did. The adults were not so lucky. Katie leaned forward, studying the image. The small creatures were huddled together in the center of the pod. They seemed to be shaking. Galactic Council regulations are clear, Dan Cooper said. Velkar hatchlings are classified as Class A dangerous organisms. Without adults to control them, they must be destroyed immediately. Destroyed? Katie turned to look at him. They're babies. They're predators, Dan shot back. Every database we have says the same thing. Velkar hatchlings are extremely aggressive. They attack anything that moves. There are at least a dozen documented cases of hatchlings killing research teams who tried to study them. Dr. Palmer nodded slowly. The records are consistent. No one has ever successfully interacted with Velkar young. The species does not allow outsiders near their hatchlings. The few times people have encountered them, the results were fatal. Katie looked back at the screen. The hatchlings were still clustered together. One of them seemed to be making small movements with its front legs. What do we actually know about their development? Almost nothing, Dr. Palmer admitted. The Velkar are extremely private about their young. They've never allowed scientists to observe them. All our data comes from hostile encounters. Then how can we be sure they're dangerous? Katie asked. Commander Harris sighed. Because every source we have says so. The Galactic Council, the Xenobiological Institute. Even the Velkar themselves have warned other species to stay away from their young. They say the hatchlings cannot be controlled. We need to follow protocol, Dan said firmly. We have authorization to eliminate the threat before it becomes worse. Katie felt anger rise in her chest. You want to kill them because you're afraid of what they might do? I want to protect this station and everyone on it, Dan replied. Those things will grow up to be the galaxy's most feared predators. Right now they're small. In a few weeks, they could be strong enough to tear through hull plating. We don't know that, Katie said. We don't know they won't, Dan countered. Commander Harris held up his hand. Enough. Dr. Morrison, I understand your concern. But we need to be realistic about the danger. Katie pulled up the video feed on her own tablet. She watched the hatchlings carefully. They were moving, but not in the aggressive way Dan described. They seemed to be trying to stay close to each other. One of the larger ones was positioned at the edge of the group, as if standing guard. But it was not attacking or threatening. It looked scared. "Give me 48 hours, Katie said suddenly. The room went quiet. Commander Harris raised his eyebrows. "For what?" "Let me go to the crash site. Let me assess them in person. If they're as dangerous as everyone says, I'll know within 2 days. But if there's even a chance that we're wrong, we owe it to them to find out before we make an irreversible decision." "Absolutely not," Dan said immediately. "You'd be walking into a death trap." "I'm a trained xenobiologist and veterinarian," Katie said calmly. "I've worked with dozens of species that people said were too dangerous to approach. I know how to read animal behavior. I know the difference between aggression and fear." Dr. Palmer looked thoughtful. "It would be an unprecedented opportunity for research. We might learn things about the Velkar that could change our understanding of the species. Or we might lose one of our best scientists for nothing," Dan argued. Commander Harris was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the screen, then at Katie, then back at the screen. 48 hours. You can take a small security team with you, but if at any point Chief Cooper determines the risk is too high, you evacuate immediately. No arguments." "Understood," Katie said. Dan shook his head. "This is a mistake." "Noted," Commander Harris said. "Dr. Morrison, you leave in 4 hours. Use that time to prepare. Study everything we have on Velkar biology. Make sure your equipment is ready. And, Dr. Morrison?" He looked at her seriously. "Be careful. I hope you're right about this, but hope is not a plan." Katie spent the next 3 hours in her laboratory, reading every file she could find about the Velkar. The information was limited and repetitive. The Velkar were insectoid. They came from a harsh world with extreme temperature variations. They were fiercely territorial. Their hatchlings were never seen by outsiders. When forced to defend their young, adult Velkar showed no mercy. But nowhere in the files did she find actual scientific observations of hatchling behavior. Everything was based on assumptions, warnings, and tragic encounters where frightened parents had killed anyone who came near their children. Katie packed her veterinary supplies carefully. Scanners, medical tools, sample containers. Then she added one more item that made her assistant, a young technician named Julie Ward, look at her strangely. "You're bringing your knitting bag?" Julie asked. Katie smiled slightly. "It helps me think. And you never know when you might need yarn." Julie did not understand, but she helped Katie carry the equipment to the shuttle bay anyway. Dan Cooper was already there with 2 junior security officers, Jake Rivers and Chris Nelson. Both young men looked nervous. They had their weapons ready and their armor sealed tight. "Last chance to change your mind," Dan said as Katie approached. Katie looked at him steadily. "Those hatchlings just lost their parents in a crash. They're alone, and probably terrified. I'm not going to let fear make us into killers." Dan's expression softened slightly, but he still shook his head. "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Katie said quietly. The shuttle lifted off from the station and headed toward the moon. Through the window, Katie could see the crash site growing larger. The twisted wreckage of the Velkar transport looked even worse up close, but the nursery pod, a silver dome near the center of the debris field, appeared intact. As they approached, Katie's hands were steady, but her heart was racing. She was about to do something no one had ever done before. She was going to walk up to Velkar hatchlings without the protection of their parents. She was either going to prove that compassion could bridge the gap between species, or she was going to prove that some fears existed for good reason. The shuttle touched down gently on the rocky surface. Katie took a deep breath, picked up her equipment bag and her knitting supplies, and prepared to meet the galaxy's most feared babies. The moon's surface was covered in fine gray dust that puffed up around Katie's boots with each step. The air was thin but breathable, kept stable by the atmosphere processors the station had installed years ago. The crashed Velkar transport loomed ahead. its broken hull casting long shadows in the pale sunlight. Dan Cooper walked beside Katie, his weapon drawn. Behind them, Jake Rivers and Chris Nelson swept the area with their scanners, checking for any threats. The young officers jumped at every small sound, every shift in the debris. "The nursery pod is just ahead," Dan said, pointing to the silver dome. It sat in a small crater, surrounded by pieces of the destroyed ship. Unlike the rest of the wreckage, the pod showed no signs of damage. Its surface was smooth and shining. Katie approached slowly, her medical scanner in hand. As she got closer, she could see through the transparent sections of the pod. The hatchlings were inside, moving around in quick, jerky motions. She counted them carefully. 12. Just as the reports had said. Up close, they were actually quite beautiful. Their shells had an iridescent quality, shimmering with colors that shifted from blue to green to purple as they moved. They had 6 legs each, and their bodies were segmented like insects from Earth. Their eyes were large and compound, reflecting the light in hundreds of tiny facets. "They're making sounds," Jake said nervously. He pointed to his audio sensors. High-pitched clicking. "The database says, that's an aggressive warning." Katie tilted her head, listening. The clicking was rapid and sharp, but she had worked with enough frightened animals to recognize distress when she heard it. "That's not aggression. That's crying." "Crying?" Chris looked at her like she was crazy. "Those are Velkar. They don't cry." "Every baby cries when they're scared," Katie said. She moved closer to the pod, studying the hatchlings more carefully. They were clustered around something in the center of the pod. Katie's heart sank when she realized what it was. A dead adult Velkar lay on the floor of the pod. Its body was crumpled and broken, clearly killed in the crash. The hatchlings were gathered around it, touching it with their small legs, making those high-pitched clicking sounds. "They're mourning," Katie said softly. "That must have been their caretaker." Dan's expression shifted slightly. He lowered his weapon a fraction. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change what they are. Velkar hatchlings are dangerous." Katie pulled out her thermal scanner and pointed it at the pod. The readings made her frown. "The temperature inside the pod is dropping. It's well below what it should be." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. "Look at how they're moving," Katie said, pointing. The hatchlings were indeed moving in jerky, uncoordinated ways, but now that she was watching for it, she could see they were also shivering. "They're cold. Very cold." She checked the pod systems with her scanner. The heating unit was dark. The crash damaged their environmental controls. The pod kept them safe from the impact, but it can't keep them warm anymore. "So they're dying?" Dan asked. "Slowly," Katie confirmed. She studied the readings more carefully. "Velkar are from a hot world. I'm reading about it in the database now. Their home planet has temperatures that would kill most species. The hatchlings need constant warmth to survive. Without it, their bodies start to shut down." Chris stepped forward to look at the scanner. "That explains the movement. They're not being aggressive. They're hypothermic." Katie nodded. "Their systems are failing. If we don't get them warm soon, they'll die within a day or two." Dan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. "That might solve the problem, without us having to make a difficult choice." Katie turned to stare at him. "You're suggesting we let them freeze to death?" "Claude. I'm suggesting that nature might be making the decision for us," Dan said. But he did not sound happy about it. "If they're dying anyway, maybe it's better than the alternative." "The alternative being that we murder them ourselves?" Katie's voice was sharp. "These are children, Dan. Scared, cold children who just watched their parent die." "These are Velkar," Dan corrected. "In a few weeks, if they survive, they'll be big enough and strong enough to be a real threat." Katie looked back at the hatchlings. One of them, smaller than the rest, was barely moving at all. It lay near the dead adult, its shell dulled and dark. "I'm going inside." "What?" All 3 security officers spoke at once. "They need help now," Katie said. "I need to assess them properly. I can't do that from out here." Dan grabbed her arm. "Katie, That's suicide. Even if they're cold and weak, they still have mandibles. They still have claws. One wrong move and they could kill you. Katie gently pulled her arm free. Then I won't make a wrong move. I need you to stay out here unless I call for help. If they see 4 armed humans, they'll panic. But if it's just me, moving slowly and calmly, I might be able to get close enough to help them. This is insane, Chris said. Probably, Katie agreed. She reached for the pod's entry panel. But I didn't come all this way to watch babies die because everyone's too scared to try. She disabled her personal force field. The small energy barrier that protected her from environmental hazards flickered and died. Dan's eyes went wide. What are you doing? That's your only protection. It would also scare them, Katie said. Animals can sense energy fields. It would feel like a threat. Before anyone could argue further, Katie opened the pod's entry hatch. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The clicking sounds from inside immediately got louder and faster. Katie stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was how cold it was. The air inside the pod was frigid, far colder than the moon's surface. Her breath came out in small clouds. The second thing she noticed was how the hatchlings reacted to her presence. They all turned to face her at once. 12 pairs of compound eyes focused on the strange creature that had entered their space. The clicking reached a fever pitch. Several of the larger hatchlings moved between Katie and the smaller ones, their bodies low and tense. Katie stood very still. She did not raise her hands. She did not make any sudden movements. She just breathed slowly and let them see that she was not attacking. It's okay, she said softly, even though they could not understand her words. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. One of the hatchlings took a step toward her, then another. Katie remained motionless. The hatchling came closer, its antennae waving in the air. It was testing her scent, trying to figure out what she was. Then, to Katie's surprise, the hatchling did not attack. Instead, it pressed against her leg. The contact was gentle. The hatchling's shell was ice cold against her through her uniform. It made a small clicking sound, different from before. Softer. Almost questioning. You're freezing, Katie whispered. She slowly, carefully, knelt down. The movement made several hatchlings back away nervously, but the one against her leg stayed close. Another hatchling approached, then another. Within moments, Katie was surrounded by small, shivering creatures seeking her warmth. They climbed onto her carefully, their legs gripping her clothes but not breaking the fabric. Their mandibles touched her skin, but they did not bite. They were tasting her, learning about her. Katie's eyes filled with tears. These were not the vicious predators everyone feared. These were terrified babies who had just lost everything. They were cold and alone and desperate for comfort. One tiny hatchling, the one she had seen barely moving earlier, crawled into her lap. It was so cold, its shell felt like ice. Katie cupped her hands around it gently, sharing her body heat. Outside the pod, she could hear Dan's voice over the comm. Katie? Katie? What's happening? Your vital signs are stable, but we can't see clearly. Are you okay? Katie touched her comm with one hand, while keeping the other wrapped around the tiny hatchling. I'm fine. They're not attacking. They're just cold, Dan. They're so cold they can barely move. What do you need? Dan asked. His voice had changed. The hard edge of suspicion was gone, replaced with concern. I need heat sources, thermal blankets, anything that can warm them up quickly. The smallest one is in bad shape. I don't know if it's going to make it without immediate help. There was a pause. Then Dan spoke again. I'm calling the station. We'll get you supplies. Thank you, Katie said. She sat there on the cold floor of the pod, surrounded by Velkar hatchlings, and made a decision. The station would probably refuse to send heating equipment for creatures they wanted dead. Commander Harris had given her 48 hours, but that was before he knew she planned to save them. Katie looked down at the shivering babies clinging to her for warmth. Then she looked at her knitting bag, which she had dropped by the entrance when she came in. An idea formed in her mind. It was unusual. It was probably ridiculous. But it might just work. She carefully reached for her comm again. Dan, I need you to send a message to the station. Tell them I'm staying here with the hatchlings. And tell them I need yarn. As much as they can send. Multiple colors if possible. The comm was silent for several long seconds. Then Dan's confused voice came through. Yarn? Katie. What are you planning? Katie smiled, even though her hands were shaking from the cold. I'm going to knit sweaters. Lots and lots of tiny sweaters. Commander Ben Harris stared at the message on his screen. He read it 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding something. But no. The word stayed the same. Dr. Katie Morrison was requesting yarn to knit sweaters for Velkar hatchlings. Is this a joke? He asked Dan Cooper, whose face appeared on the video call from the moon's surface. I wish it was, Dan replied. But she's serious. And sir, you should see the footage from inside the pod. The hatchlings aren't aggressive. They're hypothermic and scared. Doctor, Morrison is sitting in there right now with all 12 of them crawling on her for warmth. Harris pulled up the video feed from Dan's helmet camera. What he saw made him pause. Katie sat cross-legged on the floor, completely surrounded by small Velkar. They were pressed against her, on her lap. Even one balanced on her shoulder. None of them were attacking. They looked like puppies seeking comfort from their mother. This changes things, Harris said quietly. He thought for a moment, weighing his options. Send her the yarn. And send Dr. Palmer down there too. I want a second opinion on what's happening. 2 hours later, Lisa Chen stepped off the shuttle onto the moon's surface. She was a biologist who specialized in interspecies behavior, and she had been working in the station's research division for the past year. Commander Harris had pulled her from her sleep cycle and sent her to the crash site with a single instruction. Find out if Katie Morrison was right or if she was about to get herself killed. Lisa expected chaos. She expected to find Katie trapped or injured or fighting for her life. Instead, when she entered the nursery pod, she found something completely different. Katie was knitting. She sat in the center of the pod with her legs stretched out, her knitting needles moving in steady, practiced motions. Yarn flowed through her fingers, forming a small blue garment. Around her, the hatchlings watched with what looked like fascination. One of them kept reaching out to touch the yarn with its small legs, only to pull back when the strand moved. You're actually doing it, Lisa said, her voice full of disbelief. Katie looked up and smiled. Lisa, perfect timing. I need help. There are 12 of them, and only one of me. At this rate, it'll take me 2 days to finish all the sweaters. Lisa stepped closer, careful not to startle the hatchlings. They turned to look at her, clicking softly, but they did not seem frightened. One of them was already wearing the blue sweater Katie had finished. The tiny garment fit perfectly over its shell, with careful openings for its legs. The hatchling wearing it was noticeably more active than the others, moving around with curious energy. That one is Azure, Katie said, nodding toward the hatchling in blue. I named it after the sweater color. It was one of the first to approach me, so it got the first sweater. Watch how much more lively it is now that it's warm. Lisa knelt down, pulling out her scanner. She ran it over Azure carefully. The readings confirmed Katie's assessment. The hatchling's body temperature had risen to normal levels. Its metabolism was functioning properly. This is incredible. The sweater is actually working. Of course it's working, Katie said, her needles never stopping. They just needed warmth. Everything else, all the aggression and danger everyone talks about, that was probably just them being protective of cold, vulnerable babies. Lisa sat down and pulled out her own tablet. I'm going to test something. She accessed the Velkar biological database and started cross-referencing environmental data. After several minutes of reading, her eyes went wide. Katie, look at this. The Velkar homeworld has an average temperature of 52 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to kill most species. And these babies evolved to need that heat, Katie finished. Without it, they can't function. They probably seem aggressive because they're desperately trying to defend themselves when they're too cold to move properly. Which means every documented encounter with Velcar hatchlings, Lisa said slowly, was probably with babies that were already in distress. No wonder the adults were so protective. They were trying to save their dying young. Katie nodded, finishing the blue sweater and starting on a red one. Can you grab the green yarn from my bag? I think we should make each one a different color. It'll help us tell them apart, and it might make them feel special. Lisa pulled out the green yarn and sat down next to Katie. I don't know how to knit. I'll teach you, Katie said. It's not hard once you get the rhythm, and we need to move fast. That little one over there, I'm calling it amber because it has a golden tint to its shell. It's the weakest. It needs a sweater as soon as possible. For the next hour, Katie taught Lisa the basics of knitting. The hatchlings watched the entire process with intense interest. They seemed fascinated by the movement of the needles and the way the yarn transformed into fabric. Several of them tried to help, reaching out to touch the yarn, only to get tangled up and click in confusion. They're playful, Lisa observed, gently untangling a curious hatchling from the red yarn. Young predators usually are. But this is different. They're not practicing hunting behaviors. They're just exploring. Katie smiled as she worked on the red sweater. That's because they're not predators yet. They're babies. Pure and simple. By midnight, they had finished 4 sweaters. Azure in blue, crimson in red, jade in green, and amber in golden yellow. Each hatchling that received a sweater transformed within minutes. They became active, curious, and surprisingly gentle. They brought Katie and Lisa small objects from around the pod, shiny pieces of the crashed ship, pebbles from the floor, even the dead adult's armor plating. They're sharing with us, Lisa said, accepting a small metal fragment from Jade. That's a social behavior. They see us as part of their group. Katie carefully fitted the yellow sweater onto Amber, the smallest hatchling. It had been barely moving before, its shell dull and its eyes half closed. But as soon as the warm sweater covered its body, Amber perked up. It made a soft clicking sound, different from the distressed crying they had heard before. This sound was almost like purring. There you go, little one, Katie whispered, stroking Amber's shell gently. Now you'll be warm. Amber climbed into Katie's lap and settled down. Its small body finally relaxed. Within moments, it was asleep. Lisa recorded everything on her tablet. The behavioral changes, the temperature readings, the social interactions. Katie, this is groundbreaking. We're completely rewriting what the galaxy knows about Velcar development. We're just keeping them warm, Katie said, but she was smiling. She looked around at the hatchlings, some wearing sweaters, some still waiting for theirs. They deserved to be understood, not feared. They worked through the night, knitting steadily while the hatchlings played around them or napped in warm little bundles. Katie showed Lisa how to adjust the pattern for different body types. Some hatchlings needed wider neck openings for their mandibles. Some had longer bodies that required extra rows. Each sweater became a custom fit. By dawn, 8 hatchlings were wearing sweaters. The remaining 4 watched eagerly, clicking hopefully whenever Katie or Lisa picked up new yarn. That's when Lisa made her most important discovery. She was examining the body of the dead adult Velcar when her scanner caught something unusual. Katie, come look at this. Katie carefully moved Amber to a soft spot on the floor and joined Lisa by the adult's body. Lisa pointed to her scanner readings. The adult's biology shows extreme stress responses. Look at these chemical markers. This Velcar died trying to protect the hatchlings. Its last living moments were spent positioning its body between the hatchlings and the impact point. Katie looked at the dead Velcar with new eyes. It saved them. More than that, Lisa said, scrolling through more data. Look at these hormonal levels. This is consistent with what we'd call parental bonding in mammals. The Velcar don't just protect their young out of instinct. They love them. Lisa pulled up more information on her tablet. I've been analyzing Velcar military encounters. Every single aggressive action they've taken against other species can be traced back to perceived threats against their young or their breeding colonies. They're not conquering warmongers. They're defensive parents. The whole galaxy misunderstood them, Katie said softly. We saw the aggression and assumed they were dangerous. But they were just scared for their children. And because they were so protective, no one could get close enough to learn the truth, Lisa added. She looked at the hatchlings playing gently with pieces of yarn. Until now. Until you decided to help instead of destroy. Katie went back to her knitting, starting on a purple sweater for a medium-sized hatchling that kept watching her hopefully. Someone had to try. They spent the next several hours finishing the remaining sweaters, purple, orange, pink, and silver. By the time the last sweater was complete, all 12 hatchlings were warm, active, and content. They played together, grooming each other's shells and making soft clicking sounds that Lisa's translator finally identified as contentment signals. Katie leaned back against the pod wall, exhausted but happy. The hatchlings, now warm and safe, had formed a small pile in the center of the pod, their colorful sweaters creating a rainbow of shells and yarn. We need to contact Commander Harris, Lisa said. He needs to see this. The Galactic Council's regulations about Velkar hatchlings are completely wrong. Katie nodded. I'll send him a report. But before she could reach for her comm, the pod's sensors started beeping urgently. Lisa checked her tablet and her face went pale. Katie, we have a problem. A big one. What is it? Lisa turned her tablet so Katie could see the screen. There was a large ship on the sensors, approaching fast from deep space. The computer identified it immediately. Velkar warship. ETA. 2 hours. Katie's heart started racing. They came for the hatchlings, and they have no idea we're here, Lisa said quietly. Katie, if they find humans near their young, after everything we know about how protective they are, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Katie understood perfectly. The Velkar were coming to rescue their babies, and when they arrived, they would find aliens wearing strange clothes surrounding their vulnerable young. Every instinct would tell the Velkar that the humans were a threat, and the Velkar did not negotiate with threats to their children. They eliminated them. The emergency channel crackled to life in Katie's ear. Commander Harris's voice was tight with controlled panic. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Chen, you need to evacuate immediately. The Velkar warship is broadcasting on all frequencies. Our translators are working on it, but the message is clear. They want their hatchlings back, and they will destroy anyone who stands in their way. Katie looked at the 12 hatchlings playing peacefully in their colorful sweaters. Amber was balanced on Azure's back, clicking happily. Jade and Crimson were gently wrestling over a shiny piece of metal. They looked like normal, happy children. No, Katie said firmly. What? Harris's voice rose. Dr. Morrison, this is not a debate. That warship has enough firepower to level this entire moon. They've given us 2 hours to return the hatchlings. We need to evacuate and let them have their young. I'm not leaving them, Katie said. She stood up, careful not to disturb the hatchlings near her feet. And you can't just leave them here alone. They'll be cold again within an hour without us. Lisa grabbed Katie's arm. Katie, be reasonable. The Velkar adults will take care of them. That's their job, not ours. If we're here when they arrive, they'll kill us without asking questions. Then we need to make sure they ask questions, Katie said. She pulled her arm free gently. Think about it. The Velkar came here expecting to find dead hatchlings, or maybe hatchlings in distress. Instead, they're going to find healthy, warm babies wearing sweaters and playing happily. That has to make them curious. Curious enough not to kill you? Lisa asked. Katie, you're betting your life on that. I'm betting that any parent, any species, can recognize when someone has cared for their children, Katie replied. She touched her comm again. Commander Harris, I'm staying. You can order everyone else to evacuate. But I'm not leaving these hatchlings alone. The comm was silent for several long seconds. Then Dr. Palmer's voice came through. He must have been in the command center with Harris. Commander, I think, Dr. Morrison might be right. The Velkar biology I've been studying suggests they have extremely sophisticated social recognition. If they see their young are safe and healthy, it might override their defensive protocols. Might, Harris said. That's a big risk based on might. Everything about this situation has been a risk, Katie said. But so far, understanding has worked better than fear. I have to believe that will continue. Dan Cooper's voice joined the conversation. I'm staying too. If Katie's going to face a Velkar warship, she's not doing it alone. My team and I will be right outside the pod. Me too, Lisa added, though her voice shook slightly. This is the most important xenobiological discovery in a century. I have to document it. Commander Harris let out a long breath. You're all insane. But fine. You have 90 minutes before the Velkar arrive. Use that time wisely. And Dr. Morrison, if this goes wrong, I'm putting it in your permanent record. Despite the tension, Katie smiled. Understood, sir. She spent the next hour preparing. She reviewed everything she knew about Velkar body language and communication. She practiced slow, non-threatening movements. She made sure her scanner was ready to record everything. Most importantly, she played with the hatchlings, reinforcing the bond they had built. Azure seemed to sense her nervousness. The blue-sweatered hatchling stayed close to Katie, making soft clicking sounds that her translator interpreted as comfort signals. The small creature was trying to make her feel better. Thank you, little one, Katie whispered, gently stroking Azure's shell. Lisa was frantically recording data and making notes. Katie, I've been analyzing the hatchlings' behavior patterns. They've imprinted on you. In their minds, you're a caretaker figure, maybe even a parent substitute. That might actually help us. How? If the adult Velkar see their young responding to you with trust and affection, it changes the dynamic. You're not a threat. You're someone their children accept. Katie hoped Lisa was right. She picked up Azure and held the small hatchling carefully. Then Azure is coming with me when I meet them. If they see one of their own, feeling safe with me, maybe they'll hesitate before attacking. 20 minutes before the Velkar warship was due to arrive, Katie walked outside the pod. Dan, Jake, and Chris were positioned nearby. Their weapons ready but lowered. They looked terrified but determined. You don't have to do this, Katie told them. Dan shook his head. Yes, we do. You were right about the hatchlings. Maybe you'll be right about the adults too. The warship appeared in the sky like a dark storm cloud. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of Frontier Station Kepler-7. Its hull was covered in armor, plating, and weapon arrays. As it descended toward the moon's surface, the ground shook from the force of its engines. Katie's hands were shaking. She held Azure close, feeling the small hatchling's warmth through the blue sweater. Azure clicked softly, as if asking what was wrong. It's okay, Katie whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was comforting Azure or herself. Your family is here. They're going to take you home. The warship landed 200 meters from the crash site. The ground trembled with the impact. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then a door opened in the ship's side, and 6 figures emerged. The adult Velkar were enormous. Each one stood at least 3 meters tall, their shells thick and covered with armor plating that gleamed in the sunlight. They moved with deadly grace, their multiple legs carrying them across the ground in synchronized precision. Weapons were mounted on their backs and arms, all currently active and humming with power. They walked straight toward the nursery pod, and toward Katie. Dan raised his weapon instinctively, but Katie held up her hand. No. Don't give them any reason to see us as hostile. The lead Velkar stopped 10 meters away. Its compound eyes fixed on Katie, then on Azure in her arms. The other 5 Velkar spread out in a defensive formation. Their weapons all pointed at the humans. Katie's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The moment that would determine if understanding could bridge even the widest gaps, or if fear would win. She took a slow step forward. Azure shifted in her arms, then made a loud clicking sound. To Katie's surprise, the small hatchling was not scared. It was excited. It recognized its own kind. Azure clicked again, louder this time, and reached its small legs toward the lead Velcar. The adult Velcar's entire posture changed. Its weapons lowered slightly. It made a deep, rumbling sound that Katie's translator couldn't interpret. But the emotion was clear. Relief. Joy. Grief. Katie understood. This was a parent who had thought their child was dead. Moving slowly and carefully, Katie knelt down. She placed Azure on the ground gently. The small hatchling, still wearing its blue sweater, scurried across the dust toward the lead Velcar. The adult Velcar lowered itself down, and Azure climbed up its leg to perch on its shoulder, exactly where a parent might carry a small child. The adult made that rumbling sound again, and Azure responded with happy clicks. But the adult Velcar's eyes never left Katie. Its weapons were still active, still ready. The other 5 Velcar were tense, waiting for orders. Then one of the other hatchlings emerged from the nursery pod. It was Crimson, wearing its red sweater. It saw the adults and rushed forward with the fearless enthusiasm of a child running to family. Then Jade appeared. Then Amber. Then all 12 hatchlings came streaming out of the pod in their rainbow of sweaters. The adult Velcar made sounds Katie had never heard before. They lowered their weapons entirely and dropped to the ground as the hatchlings swarmed them, climbing over their large bodies, clicking and chirping in excitement. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, but the lead Velcar kept watching Katie. Slowly, it stood up with Azure still on its shoulder. It took a step toward her. Then another. Katie fought the urge to run. She stayed perfectly still as the massive alien approached. It was close enough now that she could see her reflection in its compound eyes. Close enough that its mandibles could tear her apart in seconds. The Velcar leaned down, bringing its head level with Katie's. It studied her for a long moment. Then it reached out with one of its legs and gently touched the blue sweater on Azure's back. It made a questioning sound, one that Katie's translator finally caught. Why? Katie understood what it was asking. Why did you help them? Why did you risk yourself for creatures you didn't know? Why did you care? Katie thought about all the fear, all the warnings, all the reasons she should have walked away. Then she looked at Azure, safe and warm in its sweater, perched on the shoulder of its parent who had come across the galaxy to save it. Because they needed help, Katie said simply. And because every child deserves someone who cares. The translator worked for several seconds, converting her words into sounds the Velcar could understand. When it finished, the lead Velcar was very still. Then it did something that made Dan gasp, and Jake actually stumble backward in shock. The adult Velcar reached up and began removing its helmet. No Velcar had ever removed their armor in front of another species. It was an act of complete vulnerability, of absolute trust. The helmet came off, revealing a face that was both alien and strangely expressive. The Velcar looked at Katie with eyes that showed intelligence, emotion, and gratitude. It spoke again, and this time the translator worked perfectly. You saved our children. You are family now. The lead Velcar's name was Crestal. Though Katie's translator struggled with the proper pronunciation, it took 3 attempts before Crestal made an approving click that suggested Katie had gotten close enough. The massive warrior stood before her with its helmet still off, a gesture that Lisa later explained was the Velcar equivalent of a peace offering and a sign of deep respect. You did not have to help our young, Crestal said through the translator device. The machine turned the clicking and rumbling sounds into words Katie could understand, though it missed much of the emotional depth. Galactic law says they should have been destroyed. You risked your life to save them instead. Why? Katie looked at the 12 hatchlings, now surrounded by 6 adult Velcar who were checking them over with gentle care. The adults touched each sweater carefully, their large legs examining the tiny knitted garments with something like wonder. Because they were scared and cold, Katie said. Because I saw babies who needed help. Not monsters who needed to be destroyed. I couldn't walk away from that. Crestal tilted its head in a way that reminded Katie of a curious bird. Other species have found our young before. They all tried to kill them. They called them dangerous. They said we raised predators. Maybe they didn't look closely enough, Katie replied. Or maybe they didn't want to understand. One of the other adult, Velkar, smaller than Krestal but wearing more decorative armor, approached. It carried Amber, the smallest hatchling, cradled carefully in its front legs. Amber looked tiny against the adult's massive frame, but the small creature clicked happily, content in the golden yellow sweater Katie had made. "This one was dying," the adult said. Its voice through the translator sounded female, though Katie wasn't sure if Velkar had gender in the way humans understood it. "I can see it in the body patterns. The shell was failing. But now it lives." "You saved it. The sweater kept it warm," Katie explained. "They were all suffering from hypothermia. Your ship's nursery pod was damaged in the crash. The heating system failed. Without warmth, they couldn't survive." The adult holding Amber made a sound that the translator rendered as profound sadness. "We did not know. We only knew the transport had crashed, and that our young were in danger. We came as fast as we could, but we feared we would be too late." Krestal looked at the other adults, then back at Katie. "You stayed with them. You protected them. You gave them warmth when they were cold, and comfort when they were afraid. In our culture, this makes you Kethral. The word does not translate well, but it means one who nurtures the young. A sacred role." Katie felt tears forming in her eyes. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Krestal said firmly. "What you did is what no one has ever done. You looked past fear. You chose understanding over violence. You saw our children as worthy of care, not destruction." The adult Velkar began talking among themselves in their own language, too fast for the translator to keep up. Krestal turned back to Katie after several minutes. "We wish to make a proposal. A formal one, witnessed by your leaders and ours." Katie's comm crackled. Commander Harris's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Dr. Morrison, I'm watching this feed. Whatever they're about to propose, listen carefully. This could be a historic moment." Krestal continued. "For generations, my people have been isolated. We knew other species feared us. We heard the names they called us. Monsters. Killers. Predators. We accepted this isolation because we believed it kept our young safe. But in doing so, we made ourselves prisoners of fear." The adult holding Amber stepped forward. "You showed us that not all species wish us harm. You showed us that understanding is possible. We wish to extend an offer of friendship to your kind. We wish to learn from you, and to share knowledge with you. We wish to end the isolation." Katie's heart raced. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. "I'm just a veterinarian. I don't have the authority to make agreements between species. But you have the authority to speak for yourself," Krestal said. "And we ask this. Will you stay with us? Will you teach us about these sweaters? About your customs? Will you help us learn to bridge the gap between our people and yours?" Before Katie could answer, Lisa stepped forward. She had been recording everything, her hands shaking with excitement. "Katie, do you understand what they're asking? They want you to be the first human liaison to the Velkar. This is unprecedented. This could change everything." Katie looked at the hatchlings. Azure had climbed down from Krestal's shoulder and was approaching her, clicking softly. The small creature stopped at her feet and looked up at her with its large compound eyes. Katie knelt down and picked up Azure. The hatchling settled into her arms, comfortable and trusting. "I'll help however I can," Katie said. "But I have a condition." The Velkar went very still. Krestal's translator voice said carefully, "What condition?" "I want to create a nursery program. A place where humans and Velkar can care for young together. Where both our species can learn from each other, not just about biology or language, but about how to be better." Katie looked at all the adult Velkar. "Your children taught me that fear comes from not understanding. I want to make sure the next generation, both human and Velkar, grows up without that fear." The Velkar were silent for a long moment. Then Krestal made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret. but that somehow conveyed joy. This is acceptable. More than acceptable. This is wisdom. 3 months later, Katie stood in a newly constructed facility that sat exactly between Frontier Station, Kepler-7, and the Velkar settlement. The building was designed by both species working together, combining human architecture with Velkar environmental needs. It had cost a fortune and required approval from the Galactic Council. But Commander Harris had fought for it personally. The nursery's main room was large and warm, with temperature controls that could adjust for both human and Velkar comfort. On one side, human children from the station played with educational toys. On the other side, Velkar hatchlings explored their environment with curious enthusiasm. And in the middle, the two groups mingled freely. A human girl named Sophie, who was 6 years old, sat with Jade, teaching the Velkar hatchling how to stack blocks. Jade kept knocking them over with its legs, but Sophie just laughed and helped rebuild the tower. Nearby, Azure, still wearing its blue sweater, though it had grown considerably, was showing a human boy named Tommy how Velkar used their mandibles to manipulate small objects with precision. Katie walked through the nursery with Crestal beside her. The adult Velkar visited the facility every day, watching the children of both species play together. Other adult Velkar had joined the program as well, learning from human teachers and sharing their own knowledge in return. The sweaters, Crestal said, gesturing to a wall display. Katie had framed photos of all 12 original hatchlings wearing their colorful sweaters. They have become a symbol for our people, not just for warmth, but for the moment we learned that kindness exists across species barriers. Katie smiled. I've been teaching your people how to knit. Some of them are getting quite good at it. Yes, Crestal clicked, with what Katie now recognized as amusement. My partner has been making sweaters for every hatchling in our colony. We now have 300 young ones wearing human-made garments. It has become a tradition. When a Velkar hatches, it receives a sweater as its first gift, a reminder that we are no longer alone in caring for them. Lisa entered the nursery carrying a datapad. She had been appointed as the official xenobiologist for the joint program and spent her days documenting the development of both species' young. Katie, you need to see this. The Galactic Council just released their report. Katie took the pad and read quickly. Her eyes went wide. They're reclassifying Velkar hatchlings. No longer Class A dangerous organisms. They're changing the protocols across the entire galaxy. Because of what you discovered, Lisa said. Because you proved that the Velkar weren't naturally aggressive. They were just protective parents dealing with vulnerable young. Every xenobiology textbook in the galaxy is being rewritten. Crestal made a deep rumbling sound. And it is not just the Velkar. 3 other species have contacted the Galactic Council. Species that were labeled as dangerous and isolated. They have asked for human mediators to help them communicate with other races. They say if humans could understand the Velkar, perhaps they can be understood as well. Katie felt overwhelmed. I didn't do anything special. I just helped some scared children. That is exactly why it was special, Crestal said. You did not see them as Velkar. You did not see them as aliens. You saw them as children who needed care. That perspective, that willingness to help without prejudice, that is what the galaxy has been missing. A Velkar hatchling, one of the new arrivals wearing a bright green sweater, scurried over to Katie. It climbed up her leg and settled on her shoulder, a common gesture of affection among young Velkar. Katie stroked its shell gently, and it made the soft purring click that meant contentment. Dan Cooper walked into the nursery, now wearing a uniform that marked him as head of security for the joint facility. He had come a long way from the man who had wanted to destroy the hatchlings. Katie, there's someone here to see you. Says they're from the Xenobiological Institute. Something about an award. Katie sighed. Not another one. I've already received 4 awards. I'm a veterinarian, not a diplomat. You are both now, Crestal said. And you are Kethril. The nurturer. The one who cares. This is your path now. Katie looked around the nursery at the children playing together, human and Velkar learning from each other without fear or prejudice. She thought about how it had all started with 12 cold, scared hatchlings and some yarn. I suppose there are worse paths, she said with a smile. 6 months after the initial rescue, Katie received a message from Commander Harris. The Velkar had formally requested that she establish similar nursery programs on 3 other worlds. The Galactic Council had approved the funding. The program was expanding. Katie sat in her quarters that night, knitting a new batch of sweaters. She had requests from Velkar colonies across a dozen star systems, each one wanting sweaters for their hatchlings. The simple blue sweater she had made for Azure had started something that no one could have predicted. Her door chimed. Azure entered, now almost as large as a small dog but still gentle and playful. The original blue sweater had long since been outgrown, but Azure wore a new one that Katie had made. Sized to fit its larger frame, the young Velkar would never stop wearing sweaters. It had become part of its identity. Azure settled down next to Katie's chair, watching her knit with the same fascination it had shown months ago. Katie reached down and patted its shell. "You know what the funny part is?" Katie said to Azure. "Everyone told me you were deadly predators, the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, and I put tiny sweaters on every one of you." Azure clicked softly, a sound that Katie's translator now easily interpreted as affection. "And that made all the difference," Katie whispered. She looked out her window at the stars beyond. Out there, Velkar colonies were raising their young alongside humans. Species that had been enemies for generations were learning to communicate. Children of a dozen different races were growing up together, learning that differences were not threats but opportunities for understanding. All because one person had chosen compassion over fear. All because someone had looked at scared children and decided to help instead of hurt. All because Katie Morrison had seen 12 cold hatchlings and thought, they need sweaters. The galaxy was changing. And it had started with yarn, needles, and the simple belief that every child, regardless of what species they were, deserved kindness. Katie finished the sweater she was working on. It was purple with small golden stars knitted into the pattern. She held it up, and Azure clicked approvingly. "One down," Katie said, looking at the pile of yarn waiting to be transformed. Only 299 more to go, but she was smiling as she said it. This was her life now. Making sweaters, building bridges, and proving that the bravest thing anyone can do is choose understanding. When the whole galaxy expects violence, she picked up her needles and started the next sweater. Outside her window, a Velkar ship docked at the station, bringing more families who wanted to be part of the program. Inside the nursery, children of 2 species slept peacefully together, warm and safe. And somewhere in the galaxy, a legend was growing. The legend of the human who had faced the most feared species in existence, armed with nothing but kindness and knitting needles, and had changed everything. They had told her the hatchlings were deadly predators. She had put tiny sweaters on every one, and in doing so, she had taught the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but the willingness to care.